Well, it's absolutely true that lithium batteries lose about 30% of their range in minus 20 degrees Celsius and minus 50% range in minus 30 degrees Celsius. There's some important context that always gets left out of that discussion, and that's that range loss is only present while the batteries are still cold. Once you start driving, and especially after your first charging stop, the battery heats up, which means that generally you only see that severe range loss during the first leg of your drive. And even overnight, much like a gas car has a block heater you can plug in to keep the engine warm and stop it from freezing, you can leave an EV plugged in and it'll actually keep the batteries nice and warm and toasty. And you can do this even with a standard run-of-the-mill wall outlet. Another super common concern is range loss due to using HVAC, like keeping the cabin nice and hot. But in most moderate winter conditions, I'm talking like minus 10 degrees Celsius and warmer, you're only using maybe a couple percentage an hour. Once you start getting into more extreme winter temperatures like minus 30 degrees Celsius, then it can go as high as up to 10% an hour just used to heat the cabin. But that's all going to depend on things like how often you're opening the doors and letting the cabin vent, how hot you have it set, the size of your battery, and even how big the cabin is in the vehicle and how much space it has to heat up. Now, keep in mind that all modern EV route planning software that plans out all your charging stops for you is very smart as to how much power you're using. If you have the heat on, it'll know this and it'll factor that into its calculation as to where it's going to plan your charging stops. And it's dynamic as well. So if it figures out that you're using more or less power on the go than what it originally figured, it will adjust your charging stops as needed to get you where you need to go. And there are fast chargers literally everywhere now. Seriously, if you've ever heard the myth that there's no charging infrastructure, that is many years out of date. And speaking of fast charging EVs in extreme winter conditions, if you plug it in right away while it's been parked outside for over a day and it's still a frozen brick, there will be a warm-up period where the car has to warm up the battery to the proper temperature before it'll let it start charging, because lithium batteries won't let themselves be charged in sub-zero temperatures as it can actually damage them. But your car is smart and knows this. Now, that's only an issue if, like I said, you've left your car parked right there at the charger for over a day and you plug it in without moving it. If you do even at least 20 minutes of driving before your first charging stop, that gives the car plenty of time to warm the car up to the proper temperature before you plug in and charge. Once you start actually driving and get the battery nice and warm, you will be surprised how little extreme cold temperatures will actually affect a long distance road trip. And here's an example. So recently I drove my Tesla Model 3 this past summer from roughly outside of Toronto to Halifax. That's a 1,700 kilometer road trip. So I took that route and plugged it into a better route planner. You can fiddle with all the temperatures and stuff to get a pretty accurate estimate of what your drive will look like. So I set it for 20 degrees Celsius, which is give or take what it was for my drive a couple months ago. And then I also set it for minus 30 degrees Celsius for an absolute worst case winter condition. For the summertime route, it looks pretty accurate as to what my drive actually looked like. It has 10 total charging stops for a total combined charging time of 3 hours. And if we plug in the minus 30 degrees Celsius, you can see it doesn't actually change that much. It adds 3 extra charging stops and an extra hour of charging. And keep in mind, this is for minus 30. So as you could probably guess, all this concern about winter driving conditions for EVs is kind of overblown. If you want to see all the camping and adventures that I get up to with my EVs, click the card.